My name is Megan Malat. I'm a pianist that is currently based here in Montreal, where I am right now. I'm in one of those classic Montreal walk-up apartment buildings, and I wish that we could be there in person with you, but we're so happy to be able to still bring music to you virtually. So thanks for having us. I grew up on a farm in Saskatchewan, actually, a grain farm in the southeast part of the province. And I was very lucky because I had a piano teacher for my first 13 years of studying piano, who also lived on a grain farm near Weyburn, which is kind of my closest hometown, really. That's where I went to high school and everything. And so her name is Cherith Alexander, and she was a huge part of my formation, both musically and just as a person, really. And so after that, I went to McGill and McGill University here in Montreal, and I studied for 6 years. And I've been here since I finished in 2017. I've been working as a collaborative pianist, freelancing with different things around the city and the province, and working with Amy fairly consistently during that time also.
Thank you to Prairie Debut and Manitoba Arts Council for making this possible. It's nice to be able to reach some new listeners. I am also from Saskatchewan myself, also based in Montreal now. I grew up in Regina, so I'm perhaps more the city girl in the duo, though now we definitely bond over the fact that we are both prairie girls at heart, living in the big city in Montreal. And so, yeah, very happy to be with you today and share some great music. My personal story is that I grew up admiring Megan. She was one of these people who just totally killed it at every music festival there was. And of course, you know, my sisters and my mom and I, we were always like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if we could play with Megan sometime? And unfortunately, it didn't actually work out when we were in Saskatchewan. But when I was a student at McGill, I'm a few years older than Megan. And so I was just waiting for her to come so I could snatch her up. And we played a sonata together. We worked with my teacher as a duo. And from there, she was nice enough to keep collaborating with me. So started at McGill University, and it's taken us across the country.
Well, I have to say, I knew that there were some Saskatchewan musicians that were already in Montreal when I first moved here. And that was actually part of what helped me make that transition from a grain farm in the middle of nowhere in Saskatchewan to Montreal. So yeah, I knew there was a pianist and another violinist here that I was close friends with, and I also knew that Amy was here, and that was actually a real source of comfort for me. And so I was so excited when Amy asked if I would play with her for her final recital. It was really a privilege for me because that was my first opportunity to also work with one of the violin professors as well. We were lucky to get coachings from Amy's teacher at the time, whose name was Denise Lupien, and she kind of took us under her wing and really encouraged us. And so that was also huge for me, being that I was just new to the city and getting to play with Amy, who was she was also someone that I had heard of a lot in the music scene in Saskatchewan, but had never gotten to play together yet, as Amy said.
The sonata, the inspiration was I was doing a recital with Noel Laporte and asked him, as I was wont to do in those early days. This is an early piece from the 90s, I think, sometime in the early 90s. And I often would ask, if I was doing a recital with someone, I'm a pianist, for those of you who don't know, if I wrote a piece for them, will you play it with me? And so Noel very kindly agreed to play this piece, whatever it was going to be that I wrote for him. So that was the motivation. And I found that was a good way to, when I was younger, to get pieces out there. The spirit of the piece kind of sets something at the beginning, you know, when it begins with the piano being quite declamatory there, and then the violin coming in. It's sort of setting up a sense of occasion. But to me, the music, almost all the music I write, has something to do with a journey. I find that a very nice analogy, to think of traveling through a piece of music as traveling through a landscape and seeing different things along the way. And as you travel, whether by train or by car or by bike or walking, things change, your perspective changes. And that's always, to me as a musician, the interesting thing, how the body changes and reacts in order to produce either very energetic sounds or things that are more gentle. So just all those emotional contrasts that come into play mirror traveling through a landscape to me.
So, this piece, you can think of it as a love serenade because it was written for his aunt and uncle's 50th anniversary. So, David wrote this piece about 14 years ago, I think, in 2007. And his uncle was his first piano teacher, and his aunt is a violinist. So, as an anniversary gift, he gave them a new piece of music. And he also gifted this piece to us on tour after our concert. I believe it was in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. He had a score for Megan and I, and he said, "Hey, I've never had this piece recorded, maybe, toured before. And if you're ever interested, here's the score." So it's really cool to be able to work on a new piece that, no one's ever recorded before. People don't know, but you can understand, as Megan was saying, the personality behind the work and the context behind the work. And I think this piece really shows both the depth in David's character, but then also the lighthearted, loving warmth that he brings. Perhaps that's very fitting for an anniversary gift, this ode of struggle versus love, good times versus the bad. So it's a beautiful piece, short and sweet.
This next piece by Mozart is a sonata in D major that he wrote in the late 1700s. He was actually in Paris at the time. And it's a little bit crazy because it's considered to be one of Mozart's sort of late mature works, but he was actually only 22 when he wrote it. And that harkens to the fact that he really did not live a long life. He only lived until his mid 30s. But talk about someone who sort of matured fast. He spent a lot of time on the road. He was always kind of touring, and his dad would sort of cart him around to play for all these kings and queens. But eventually, at this point in his life, when he was in Paris, it wasn't looking so good for him because he was actually searching for a better employment situation. than what he had in his hometown of Salzburg. So he was on this quest, and that had taken him to different places in Germany. And then eventually he ended up in Paris. So, and his mom had passed away as well while he was in Paris. So it wasn't an easy time in his life, but it's kind of amazing because with this piece, you would never know. It's so joyful and it has so much energy and brilliance. It's the last movement that you'll hear of the sonata. And it's also unusual because, well, Amy was just talking about the improvising in the cadenzas, composing in a piece of music, and normally a cadenza or basically is usually a flashy improvised solo that is typically heard only in those pieces with a soloist and an orchestra. And yet with this sonata, Mozart actually included a cadenza in it, even though it's just for violin and piano. So it's pretty neat because I think it indicates that Mozart had something a little bit grander in mind for this sonata, something a bit more orchestral that could still be achieved with just us two, the violin and the piano.
Alba was written for Megan and Amy for their 2019 Canadian tour as a companion piece to the Mozart violin and piano sonatas. The word Alba has a number of associations that I found appealing and inspiring while writing. Those who enjoy a good pun will note that the name Alba sounds suspiciously and intentionally reminiscent of Albert E. Pace. In writing a companion piece for Mozart, I used the building blocks of his music, trills, ornaments, triadic harmony, and especially the Alberti bass so often found in the left hand of his piano music, to develop my own work. Small, regular ripples of melody that are initially created using these figures become faster, more irregular, and even distorted by wide leaps and bounds, but retain traces of their origins even at their most exuberant. The word alba is both Spanish and Italian for dawn. An alba is also a type of lyric poetry traditionally Provençal, about lovers who must part at dawn. Finally, there are alba roses, a shrub rose with beautiful white sweet-scented flowers. When I was writing Alba, during the very longest days of summer, I found that all my musical ideas had a strong association with dawn and renewal. Alba is a very sunny and optimistic piece, which begins quite gently but becomes increasingly heated and energetic over its brief duration. During these shortest days of winter 2020, I'm looking forward with optimism to when the days once again begin to lengthen.
Florence Price, she was an African American composer that was born in Arkansas in the late 1800s, and she was pretty cool because she was she kind of went off the beaten path a little bit and pursued classical music. Career. And as we know, especially from the Black Lives Matter movement, it's become very clear to all of us yet again that Black composers and musicians are so underrepresented in our world. So it's kind of cool to have people like Florence Price in the past that are sort of beacons to say, this is amazing when we have these different cultures, and it shouldn't just be something that's like a Western Caucasian world. That's not what we're going for here. And so with Florence Price's music, it's really cool because she incorporates African American spirituals with sort of more traditional Western classical kind of forms and instrument combinations like violin and piano. And so whenever this happens in classical music, it's always an opportunity for myself and anyone else who's working on the music to learn about these different cultures. So working on these pieces by Florence Price was an opportunity for me to listen to some of these spirituals that are honestly some of the most moving music that I can hear. Like I've been brought to tears a lot by something like Deep River, and so to sort of get at the foundation of those emotions and be able to sort of try to evoke that in our world of classical music is a pretty special opportunity, I think. And so you're going to hear in this next piece by Florence Price, it's a fantasy that she wrote. So it starts out being quite improvisatory, quite bombastic. There's a cool violin solo at the beginning where Amy just kind of knocks the socks off of it, and then it ends also in that kind of exciting manner. But in the middle of it, there's a bit of an oasis where it harkens to that world of African American spirituals, where you have kind of a slow, soulful melody that you'll hear in the violin part, and that when you hear that, I hope that it will just be a kind of a moment of calm for you, where time will stop a little bit, and you can just enjoy sort of the beauty of the melody that Florence Price has written there in the middle.
So this is what we call an arrangement. That means that Florence Price is not responsible for the main melody of this piece. The main melody is a traditional spiritual, one your listeners might be familiar with, called Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. I know that when I first played this piece for my grandparents in Saskatchewan, my grandmother said to me, "I know that. I grew up singing that spiritual." So you may very well find it familiar, especially because there are some great recordings of it sung by Paul Robeson, Barbara Hendricks, Marian Anderson. But of course, an arrangement for violin and piano does not include voice. So just as a brief introduction to set the stage for this piece, I'm just going to read the lyrics of what you would hear if this piece had a singer. So the words to this song are, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child a long ways from home. True believer, a long ways from home."
So this next piece is called Moto Perpetuo, and it's by a composer by the name of Danuk Wijeratne. He was located in the Maritimes for a while in Halifax, Nova Scotia, but he now relocated to Toronto. So he's very famous in Halifax, and they sort of call him their own in Nova Scotia, I think. So this piece he wrote this piece when he was pretty young. It was from his teenage years. And Danuk told us that it was kind of the first time that he really brought the Western and the Eastern worlds together in his music. And that's become a real theme in his style of composition. And so Danuk, he was born in Sri Lanka. And then he grew up in Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. And then eventually, as I said, ended up in Halifax and now Toronto. So you're going to hear in this piece, it's got these different influences, especially rhythmically. You'll hear kind of Sri Lankan drumming techniques in the opening piano solo. And so there's a bit of a groove that's going on that's kind of got some asymmetrical rhythms, but at the same time, we hope that you can sort of enjoy that groove. And then Amy comes in, and it sounds more like an electric guitar than a violin. So Danuk's piece is, he's not afraid to sort of push classical music to the extreme, which I think we need so badly sometimes in our world. And so we this piece we often use it as a concert ender because it tends to be a bit of a showstopper. And we love it, and we're so happy that Danuk wrote it, and he's just the coolest person ever. I had a phone conversation with him to try to understand these rhythms in the opening, and it was so inspiring. And I would encourage all of you also to do a little YouTube search of Indian tabla drumming techniques, because the rhythmic intricacies and the speed that they do these different rhythmic patterns is absolutely mind-blowing. So you'll learn a lot about that. And again, another example where you can really be so inspired by cultures and different ways of making music. It's quite amazing.
It's so wonderful to be able to collaborate again with Amy and Megan. Now, this piece is only 4 minutes long, and I don't know if you know the joke about the composer's cardinal sin, which would be to speak for longer than the duration of your piece. So I'm just going to tell you very briefly what this piece is about. This is very much a young person's piece. I wrote it many, many years ago, probably about a generation ago, and it takes me back to that very exciting time when I was exploring new influences. This is the first piece in my musical language where I really incorporated the influences of East and West that have become, I think, a mainstay of my music. And it's Amy and Megan play it with so much fire. I hope you enjoy it. This is Moto Perpetuo.
it's always nice to just look towards the future, and I love planning new projects and seeing what's possible, no matter what the situation is. So we're really hoping at some point in the future to finish our Pan-Canadian tour. We hit all 10 provinces, but we didn't get to the territories yet. Our tour got short right before we were about to go to the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut. So hopefully that is on our performance itinerary in the future. And we also have a tour of BC planned next season. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that works out. We only had one concert in Vancouver last season, so we're hoping to visit about 13 more communities in that province.
I was just going to say, and this ties in very much to, well, the fact that we were supposed to go up to the territories. That was largely in thanks to Prairie Debut. Prairie Debut was one of the 3 touring organizations that organized our tour across Canada, and they were really pushing for us to get up to the territories. So a huge thanks to Prairie Debut, and that they're also largely the reason why this interview could take place today, along with many other people. So I would like to just say thank you to everybody that deserves thanks. So firstly to Prairie Debut, and thanks to the Manitoba Safe at Home initiative as well. We hope that you're all safe at home, enjoying this little presentation on your couch with a blanket and cup of hot chocolate or whatever it may be. And thanks a lot to the Canada Council for the Arts and the Manitoba Arts Network, and as well as the TD and RBC Bank. And last but not least, we'll just do a little shout out to our video and audio team for our recordings that you're hearing. Those were done by Nick Jewell and Adrian Foster here in Montreal at the beautiful Chapelle Historique du Bon Pasteur. So thank you to everyone. It takes an army sometimes for these kinds of things. It takes a lot of people that contribute, and we're so happy that we have everybody's support.